Good morning, Patrick. How are you?
Good morning. How are you?
I'm brilliant. I'm brilliant. Thank you. You notice how I very skillfully didn't bring in your surname to it because I'd like you to teach us how was the proper pronunciation of it.
Absolutely. Well, it's very difficult. I was once described as Mr. Unpronounceable by a now sadly departed friend, but the easiest way to actually sort of think about it is to say Olszowski. So
Olszowski.
Olszowski.
And what's the origins of that beautiful surname?
So I have a Swedish mother, I have Polish grandparents who escaped the Nazis, and I have a British father. So essentially, and I went to an English sort of minor league rubbish Catholic boarding school. So in many ways, I'm the perfect Daily Mail hate figure. You know, I've come over here, I'm stealing your jobs, and now I'm running the country, allegedly. So yeah, that's kind of me in a nutshell, Eric.
You're like that mix, every ingredient in there. It's like the whitest of whitest of white. You know that you're the most undiverse person on the planet.
Well, I was just saying to you before this call that actually, you know, what the world doesn't really need to hear from more right now is more white, privately educated, middle class men. And yet yours is now the first podcast that I've ever appeared on as a guest rather than as an interviewer. And I'll be honest, I'm really, really nervous because the thing is, when I sort of get nervous, I start to like flirt and dissimulate and sort of like push people off course. So please just do what my therapist would say and just like totally keep me on track and just like be like, yeah, no, Patrick, you're flirting right now. Just let's keep on track, and then I'm really happy to go anywhere this interview goes, Eric.
Oh, brilliant, brilliant, and I'm thrilled to have you. So just to unpack this and just to put it in perspective for the listeners, you recently did some work with a great friend and colleague of mine, Priscilla McKinney, on, I guess that was on social media and being
Social
present,
selling,
social selling, and all of that.
Yeah.
So how did that go, and how was the experience with the fantastic Priscilla?
I mean, it's when in doubt, I always find that I need to just sort of, when I'm ever confused about a decision, I always just turn to like an Instagram quote card to basically as the answer to any difficult question. And I saw something yesterday that just said, it may even have been from you, Eric. So apologies if I'm sort of praying you in aid by mistake, but it did basically say, you'll never have as good a friend as one as you met on social media. And actually, I've never met Priscilla face to face. We've never been on the same continent together. I met her through the pandemic, through this sort of initiative I set up to basically bring together people with professional skills and charities and not-for-profits that needed support called Crisis Connections, and we got to know each other through that. And then she told me about this course. I came on the course all around sort of digital transformation, social selling, and it was really, really brilliant. I mean, the thing with Priscilla is A, she's an incredible human. B, she's so funny, isn't she? And C, she just really knows her onions. And so
Oh my goodness.
Actually this ability to say, look, let's try and go and build these relationships at massive sort of scale and reach. And I've never met more people internationally and got more business than I have through working with LinkedIn. So it's been absolutely brilliant, Eric.
No, awesome. No, I put Priscilla very much in that camp of, isn't it lovely when you come across people who are so competent at what they do, but so self-deprecating, so comedic in their approach.
Yeah. How did you two meet?
We're both associated to the same company. So the program that Priscilla delivers, I deliver it to a different vertical in a different industry, and we both hook back to Priscilla runs Little Bird Marketing, but we're both associates of DLA Ignite. So our social selling and all of that, the framework and fabric and all of that is the work of Tim Hughes and Adam Gray, and Priscilla and I are both colleagues for DLA Ignite. So yeah, fantastic, outstanding. So. Great to have you here. It's been a little bumpy in trying to set it up. That's all my fault. Outrageous.
We're in a pandemic.
We are.
We're in a global, like, sort of, like epoch-making pandemic, Eric. Let's just basically cut each other some slack. It'll be fine.
Thank you. I feel as if some slack has been cut. That's beautiful. I can relax now. So the sign that we can see Outrag Impa behind you right now, but Outrag Impa, outrageous impact. What's it all about? Because that's the reason really that we're here is your story and outrageous impact. I find phenomenal. So what's it all about?
Well, thank you very much. So essentially, we are a network of senior qualitative and sort of semiotic researchers who work with organizations, everything from sort of political pressure groups, charities, not-for-profits, profit businesses, that want to both grow their profits and also tackle some of the most sort of pressing social injustice issues in the world. So work with everyone from sort of Goldman Sachs to Grenfell Tower and everyone in between.
My goodness me. Right, we're going to come back to that because the typical form here is not that I want to get stuck in some sort of tram line, but we put the headline up and then we get in the old time machine and go back to the very start. But you know, as well as you're CEO, lead researcher of Outrageous Impact, but you also run the Outrageous Impact podcast, right?
I do.
And how many have you done to date?
So I've done 32, 33. So currently I've just got a sort of 3-part special on called Open for Business, which is kind of profiling people in the in-person market research space,
Right.
and kind of how they've been sort of going to absolutely Herculean efforts to sort of keep their spaces open and safe for participants. And, you know, actually a lot of that sort of like leadership things, you know, leading their own teams, transforming their own businesses, merging with other people, lobbying together. I mean, seriously, if you realized quite how much had been going on behind the scenes, you would, you know, be absolutely astounded. So I wanted to sort of highlight some of those series through this sponsored series. So that's been great.
Yeah.
And then, you know, I basically profile people who are kind of trying to change the world, but also, you know, build profitable businesses. So I've spoken to people who use VR, for example, virtual reality, for getting boards to think differently about diversity. I spoke to a free diver called Helena Bourdillon, who was absolutely incredible. And she was basically talking about how learning to free dive stopped her essentially, you know, taking her own life. You know, all sorts of just incredible people. You know, last week I spoke to somebody who's in Japan, talking about, you know, the different conceptions around working time and around activism in Japan. So really just trying to get behind the CVs, get behind the marketing fluff, and just get to the people that are kind of trying to make the world smell a bit better.
And my goodness, don't we need a bit of that right now? Don't we need a truckload of air freshener right now?
I mean, there is a little bit of sort of badness out in the world, and you know, the problem is for me, Eric, is when you look and sound like the patriarchy, everyone expects, i.e., me, everyone expects that I'm going to be part of the problem. So I basically spend most of my time going, yeah. Let's really mess up the patriarchy real bad, or like, come on, let's abolish private schools. So I'm basically like the sort of real, like sort of like I'm the real bête noire, the real black sheep that appears at, like, you know, parents' dinner parties and drinks parties when that used to happen. It'd be like, oh yeah, I went to private school. I hated it. I was lonely. I was sad.
I don't
and then
believe
basically
it.
everyone's like, nobody wants to talk to this guy. Just leave him alone. So maybe that's why I've never really been invited to come on podcasts before, Eric, because it's just kind of, I'm just too much of a sort of like moaning Myrtle out of Harry Potter, you know.
Was that why you started the Outrageous Impact podcast? Because you thought I'd really love to be in a podcast, and maybe the only way I'm going to get one is to have my own.
It actually started, it's strange you should ask that, because it's gone through a few iterations. But in fact, one of the very first people I interviewed was a woman that I met at a kid's 4th birthday party. And she was called Steffa, and she was in her 80s. She was absolutely sort of immaculately turned out. And we were just standing probably over some party rings, or like those little pink wafers that you get, you know, the sort of the ones that like rot your teeth filling. Exactly. Yeah. But I like, you eat them and they're just suddenly like, you just get this utter hit. It's what I imagine cocaine is like. Not that I've ever done cocaine. Don't do cocaine, kids. It's very dangerous. But it's what I imagine.
Do pink wafers instead.
Exactly. It's very Moorish, very Moorish. There's a reason I've been 12 years sober. And I think, so I was chatting with Steffa, we were over the party rings, that's not a euphemism. And basically she started telling me this story, and it transpired I was the first person she'd ever told this story up to. And it had been about how she'd been a 10-year-old child in a part of Poland that's now part of Ukraine, and how in the 1940s they'd had a knock on the door. Russian soldiers had appeared at the door and said, no questions, get ready. And then how essentially her entire family had been loaded onto cattle trains and had been transported for 4 weeks up to Siberia, up in the north of Russia. And then this incredible 7-year journey that she'd had basically being separated from her father being sent to a logging camp, 3 of her siblings dying, her mother basically standing up to the camp guards in this Siberian sort of work camp saying, "You've killed my 3 children. If you don't let me work, my other child will die, and then the care of this child will be on you." Parental guilt. And she had never told even her own children this story, and she told me this story first, and it just reminded me of the sort of power of personal testimony.
Good Lord. Good Lord. Did she just, when she's telling you this, did she just see you open mouth with like a mouthful of pink wafer?
Thankfully we actually had a bit of a moment between, we had like a few weeks between Wafergate, as I now think of it, and like sitting in her beautiful house I think it was out in Ealing somewhere, and just basically just literally turning the tape on, and her incredible voice. The thing was, she really reminded me of my grandmother as well, who'd been on this 4-year run from the Nazis as well, with 2 young boys, my 2 uncles, again, who are both now sadly deceased. And just hearing Steffa talk and hearing my grandmother Zofia talk, and they just sounded so similar, Eric. So it was really atmospheric and incredible and quite spine tingling, and just reminded me of the power of that testimony.
Yeah, very good, very good. I love the image you created there, and also you sort of reinforced it by saying I pressed the tape machine. So I now have an image of you sitting with a reel-to-reel tape recorder and an old microphone, speaking to Steffa. Yeah, brilliant. Right, let's jump back in time and work our way back. So where did you grow up? What was school all about? What was school like?
Yeah, so grew up in Kent. Was basically local village sort of primary school, then went to the sort of private prep school outside Sevenoaks.
Only child, or brothers and sisters? Or
I'm one of 4.
One of 4.
Catholic family,
right.
And so I'm the oldest. And probably the naughtiest. Like I would do things like sort of like tell kids that if they were behind a wall of bogey, I would eat my way through, that sort of thing, or like punch a child at a kid's party. So I was kind of always the one being told off and just being told to like kind of do my, play by the rules. And I often think that that's one of the reasons I've become so anti-authoritarian. It's just like, I'm just like, life is too short for rules. Yeah. But it's strange because I've also then craved that authority as well. And so, when I went to boarding school, which, without giving you the full, 18 months worth of psychoanalysis that I've gone through to try and sort of literally come to terms with that shattering emotional experience, actually it was, that very much made me go, you know what, you have to rely on yourself. You have to just be able to have that discipline and that drive to get up and do things even when you don't want to. And I would just say that, I know there were best intentions on all sides, but my strong belief now is that we need to abolish private schools and we need to abolish boarding schools, because I think that actually what it does is it separates kids from families. And I think it also creates this artificial reinforcement of class that is just so damaging. And when you look at so many of the decisions that have been made now, whether it's around embedding patriarchy, whether it's around, not tackling domestic violence properly, whether you look at emotional unavailability, so many of those decisions are made by leaders that went through the private school system, and we just need to stop that, knock that shit on the head right now, Eric. So yeah, just that's my sort of personal hobby horse with all of that, really.
I mean, our backgrounds, it's lovely that we've ended up on the screen together, because our backgrounds are completely different. I grew up in the council estates in Glasgow and had quite a rough upbringing, quite nasty, just went through a regular sort of high school, council high school and all of that. But I've since worked with and formed really good bonds with people who've been through private education and boarding schools and all of that. And no one's got a good thing to say about it. No one's got a good thing to say about it. And sitting from the outside, and I'm probably no position to comment here, but taking a young child away who's trying to form bonds and work out what they are in the world, and saying you're going away to just be on your own seems horrific. Seems horrific.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And I think, it's not, I think for our family, it was very much about, we're second generation immigrants, we want to assimilate, we want to become part of the way in which this country operates. So it was a rational clear-headed decision, and a financially difficult decision for my parents. I was there on a scholarship and various other things like that.
Right.
But I think you're right. I think, for me, it was the sort of emotional, being alone, being brought up by other kids who were emotionally immature, and also the amount of physical violence that's going on. I mean, I was lucky. It was not, sexual abuse or anything like that, but there is an awful lot of just casual violence day to day in these settings, and that is not a good environment to grow up in.
The repercussions of such are not fully understood by that young mind yet. I mean, this is Lord of the Flies type stuff. People trying to find what they are in the world, and violence comes into it because it's unregulated. And yeah, absolutely, without a doubt. So, but you got through it.
I mean, I will leave that question hanging. I think it's it's had a huge impact on the whole of my life, Eric.
Right.
It's colored the way I've related to other people. It's colored the way I've related to alcohol, to so many things. It's changed every aspect of my life. And
Crikey.
I would honestly say that it's been the last 18 months where I've been able to just go, you know what, I'm going to commit to a weekly, process of like talking this out and making sense of this.
Good.
That I've started to actually come to some sort of terms with it, because, you don't, I think the thing that's sad is you hear people, like you just said, talk about the impact of this and saying, it was the worst time of my life. And yet if they're ever asked about it in polite company, they'll say, no, brilliant time, loved it. Or they'll say, yeah, I'm definitely sending my own kids to boarding school. And it's just it's that inability to say, this was really hard, it was really painful, and I'm going to step away from that. And I'm going to do something different. And that's what I'm really trying to do every day with my life.
Good for you. And outstanding. And I guess the more that you do talk about it, more people will come around you and shore you up and support you, and you can support other people as well. So that's what this is all about. So you come out of school, and what was your sort of first step into the occupational world, and why?
So I basically worked for my next door neighbour's garage startup, the mighty Chartland Associates, so called because his house was actually called Chartland. Right. And basically, it was my next door neighbour had a little tiny garage, and we were selling CRM databases in a box. Would you believe it? Software actually came in a box. You'd get like a manual, you'd get like a CD-ROM.
Yep.
And basically we're selling these things like absolute gangbusters. And, it was just an incredible journey, helped grow that business. I was the third employee. When I left, there were 40 of us, and we were turning over, 6 odd million quid. I actually got sacked for failing to meet sales target, but that was nothing really to do with Chartland. That was all because basically my then girlfriend moved to Japan, and basically my heart got broken, and I was like, oh God, this is so bad. And it was just like, I don't want to work. I don't want to do anything. So I became like this sort of lovelorn, sort of slightly uglier Ethan Hawke figure out of Before Sunset, pining after like Julie Delpy. It actually wasn't Julie Delpy. I won't mention the person because it's just, those days are long gone. But it's just kind of, I was there as some sort of mournful teenager. I was just like, I don't want to work. I hate work. I'm just going to basically sack all this off. So I essentially just lost the plot. And then I just went through a succession of like just really crummy jobs, and shout out to the absolute bellends at the Conrad International in Chelsea Harbour. I hate your guts. You were horrible people. And I think the guy was called Stavros. He was like their food and beverage manager. You were such a horrible person. I hated him. He made my life a misery. But
Stavros, if you are listening, we can maybe talk it over. Maybe I could be a bridge builder, and we could.
I will hunt you down. I will hunt you down. I don't think he was even called Stavros, but he was called something like that. And I will literally find you.
Like Liam Neeson.
Let's not talk about Liam Neeson. He's had a few, messy, sort of just rather unpleasant recent incidents. But I will hunt you down.
Right, so thankfully, you took some strange left turns and right turns at T-junctions in your occupation, but something started. I mean, looking at your profile, I look at a lot of profiles. That's what I do for a living.
Is this my Tinder profile or LinkedIn?
This is
both. For a friend.
Both, holding them up together.
Don't tell my wife.
Roundabout, I would say, did something happen round about Great Ormond Street that sort of changed things for you?
Yeah, I mean, a great friend of mine who I'd just like to give a shout out to, Shona. She's incredible. She's now basically working in one of the COVID hot zones in East London in a hospital, and it's absolutely incredible. Both her and her husband are medics and are just doing heroic work.
Wow.
So just massive shout out to Shona and Alex. I just love you guys so much. But Shona basically said that there was this job coming up at Great Ormond Street. It was working for the then chief exec, and it was basically kind of being like a fluffer for the chief exec. It wasn't quite described as that, Eric, but kind of the idea was like loads of celebrities and people would come to the hospital, and like Uri Geller wanted to come to the hospital, Michael Jackson wanted to come to the hospital. Let's not say any more about that. In fact, I will tell you about that in a minute. Yeah, okay, fine, let's move on. And basically, so I was there, and it was sort of like bringing these celebrities around the hospital, getting to know all of the clinical staff, and it was kind of like a meter and greeter role, and it just kind of started me on this path of like basically what you'd now call like public affairs or campaigning or sort of media relations, public relations type stuff, and that kind of became the golden thread for my working career since, really. So I then spent 15 years working in a range of different sort of not-for-profits, charities in the UK, and really looking at how do you use people's stories and research to create really meaningful change. And so I've raised millions of pounds worth of income to support charitable causes. I've changed the law a number of times. I've changed professional practice. So, for example, got new clinical guidelines developed for the treatment of childhood stroke in the UK. There were two warring groups of doctors that, because one of them had developed this set of guidelines and the other didn't like it, they didn't talk to each other. So I helped sort of broker a peace between the two of them and raised a load of money from somebody with a really interesting backstory that I won't go into, but it was quite interesting, to basically then fund the creation of new guidelines. And that now means that approximately 400 children a year are correctly diagnosed when they do have stroke. So it's kind of saying, can you use research to create socially useful outcomes? And then just finally, just to say, also been a very scared but quite enthusiastic sort of activist at the same time. So going and doing things like occupying police stations, trying to get myself arrested at concrete factories, around the environmental sort of climate justice movement, running roadblocks through the centre of London, being dogged by police helicopters, that sort of thing, going to refugee camps and getting harassed by French, security guards and this sort of thing. So always trying to go to where the scene of the action is as well.
Why? There are lots of people who have gone through boarding school, got themselves in a nice corporate job, hunkered themselves behind a big wooden desk, and got loads of staff, lovely salary, final salary, pension, shares, all of that. Probably a lot of your fellow students have gone through that kind of road. Why have you taken this more difficult, challenging road where you feel the need to help people?
Yeah, so just to say, I've got none of those. So I just keep on thinking I've made like a massive error. So like I should have just used the benefit of my education for pure self-enrichment. Eric, what a fuck up. Am I allowed to swear on this thing? I hope so. If not, just beat me out.
Oh my goodness.
What a mistake. Okay, so but
you're the first person to ever have a realization and a breakdown that your life's a mess. No, not at all. Not at all.
No, but it's fine. It's strange because there are two values that really dominate my life. The first is sort of fairness. Yeah. And I think that definitely comes from the boarding experience of just like feeling like there's so much that is unfair and out of your control. And so fairness is a massive driver for me. And the second is that I really believe in freedom, and I believe in that ability, not unconstrained freedom, not like a weird sort of libertarian freedom, but I believe in that ability to follow your interests, to follow your passions, to be able to go where the action actually is. And I think, my grandmother was on my dad's side, was a massive inspiration. I mean, when the Second World War kicked off, she basically, they'd been basically aristocrats in the south of Poland. They owned land. Right. My grandfather was a ship owner. They had this 8-bedroom sort of wooden built house that was like kind of like a Polish wooden Downton Abbey. I mean, it's kind of a bit weird, but kind of a bit like that. In massive grounds, they'd have like sort of Prussian cavalry officers land on their tennis court in sort of biplanes. That sort of stuff was going down.
Crikey.
And then the Second World War comes, And on day one, my grandfather is in Amsterdam with all his ships, and he signals for them to move across to the Allies. And he basically gets on one of the last ships to go across to the British side, and then spends his sort of life, we later learn, working in Polish naval intelligence, in Scotland, in fact. And then my grandmother is left in Poland with my two uncles who were 10 and 12 maybe, and they're on the run for 4 years. I mean, the day of the war launching, basically the lands are seized. There's a death camp that's set up just up the road. They are basically sheltered. They're Polish Catholics, sheltered from house to house by friends. They live on, in flats above Gestapo headquarters for times, and are literally just being helped from house to house to house to move across. And eventually my grandmother and uncles are sealed up to their waist in water, and put in a water container on the side of a ship that is destined for Sweden. And they stand for 72 hours in this water container, and are turned back once by the Gestapo, come on board with dogs and this sort of thing. And I think it's that experience, hearing about her time on the run, hearing about her escape, hearing about her families then living under communism and living under surveillance societies, has made me, it's no surprise that I've then gone to refugee camps or worked at Grenfell Tower, or, been part of taking legal cases against the government, or wanting to sort of challenge the surveillance state, because these things are emotionally still real to me.
Yeah, but I do think there's something about you. I mean, there are people who've had, okay, not the same, but similar stories, who've taken a much easier route in life. So the bit about you, it's not in your DNA to be like this. It's in your DNA to know about it. But you've taken a decision, and you've maybe met a mix of your own personal circumstances, and you've decided you're going to do something about it. Which
but it's
I think
personally healed me as well as helped others.
Yeah.
And I think that's the other thing is we think that altruism is basically all about other people. And actually the fascinating thing for me is finding that intersection of how you can show somebody that doing something for other people is also kind of so healing and so helpful for yourself.
Yeah, totally. My goodness me. My goodness. So, yeah, it seems a little bit trite to just start talking about the rest of your career after that.
No, don't
quite powerful.
Let's lighten this up, Eric. Come
so
on.
Then you went to director of campaigns at Share Action.
I know. I mean, great charity, and I was totally unprepared. I mean, talk about sort of emotional time bomb. I won't go into all the details, but just to say that when you haven't done that inner emotional work, and then you get into a leadership role, and it's suddenly very demanding, and you've got teams that are expecting so much from you, and you're not able to do that yourself, that's hard. Yep. Then throw in a new management team that was kind of storming, norming and forming, and was kind of working out what powers are going to be retained and what powers are going to be sort of held on to by founders. And then at the third level, you've basically got the Southern Rail crisis, where basically the government make yet another brilliant decision about transport, and yet again a bunch of sort of train drivers and sort of guards go on like a protracted 3-year industrial dispute that means that you often spend 4 hours a day standing, and something had to give. And after 9 months, it was really clear that we were our relationship status was complicated. Yeah. As Taylor Swift says, we are never, ever getting back together. I mean, I have a lot of love for those people. They're lovely people, but it's just some harmonics are just not good.
Not meant to be. Yeah, absolutely.
And it's sometimes not the right time. And so I basically left. I didn't have another job to go to. Thank God I had a more successful wife, Eric. And I basically just went out and I chatted to 50 or 100 people. Yeah. And I just said, what do you think of me?
Yeah. And
I mean, do you want to guess what some of them said?
I have guessed what some of them said.
Fine. Yeah. So people were saying things like, yeah, we don't really know what you do. That was number one. You're a bit of a curate's egg. You're a bit strange. You're very passionate. You get things done really quickly. People talked a lot about the research I'd done before for them and how that had made a difference, sort of a practical, appreciable difference in their lives. And so I basically just said, okay, well, kind of research feels like a bit of a theme. what's it then like buying research? And they said, well, it's basically pretty slow. It's pretty expensive. Often you get the senior people selling the work and the junior people doing the work.
Yeah.
And over the first 3 years of the organization, it was literally a total roller coaster. It was like, this is really great. I'll go, this is terrible. This has made like 12 quid. I've got 38p in my account. This is so bad. Then basically last year was like brilliant. It was like, this is really working. And then I got to just handed in my final accounts 31st of March. And it was like, oh God, now the pandemic.
Yeah.
And then literally the whole world. Yeah. Just changed, didn't it?
Yeah, very much so. Very much so. So that was so you set up, was it Outrageous Impact 2016, right?
Correct. Yeah. So it'd be the 5th year this coming year.
The 5th year this coming year. So what are the kind of things that you're involved in? So the pandemic does hit. Clearly you don't stop. You've got way too much energy and way too much to say and think about the world. Mm-hmm. So what are you doing? What did you do last year? What was your area of focus? Did you pivot? Did you adapt? What happened?
Yeah. So just give me, oh my God. No, it's fine. I'm just hoping that my wife isn't trying to sign in to this at the same time for my daughter's nice. Zoom thing. I'm just going to basically just tell her. Just give me 1 second. I'm so sorry.
Yeah, sure. That's all right. No worries. There's always a first time for everything on Crux Cast.
It's going to interrupt my Zoom.
We don't want that.
Yeah, can you do it on my phone? Sorry.
And we're not editing that out. That's just the Crux Cast Gold.
Well, that's going to be really slick, isn't it?
It's very slick.
The reality of sort of a modern technology as our daughter, who always operates on these virtual forums under the stage name of Peggy, nice. Basically tries to FaceTime one of her friends through this Zoom account, which would be brilliant. So then suddenly you'd have a child's face appear rather than mine, but with my voice.
I'm tempted to leave this in because it's real life, and that's what this is all about. So we'll just leave that in. That was good fun.
No, you were just remind me of the question, Eric. I'm so sorry.
So 2020 hit, as you said. Yeah. So 5 years trading, and suddenly it hits, and you think, crikey, just as you'd handed in your accounts, COVID hit. But so what did you do? Did you readjust, pivot, whatever?
3 things really. Number 1 is I set up this Crisis Connections initiative, which kind of connected 100 professionals with 40 not-for-profits for free 1-hour advice sessions, which was really, received super well. So that was kind of a pro bono initiative. Second thing was I was just homeschooling a lot, and that was really, for everyone was kind of just, a hammer blow, but, you get through it. And then the third thing was it just made me realize I didn't want to work by myself anymore. And so I have been, and there were projects have really started to come back now, which has been fantastic. But it made me realize that kind of just being a sole founder is so hard. And actually you need those people around you to start to really make progress. And so, now in discussions with a potential business partner around an evolution of what our 2 things might become, something joined as it were. And it's a bit early to say what that might be, but, very much in that exploratory phase. And I think one of the things that I've been so pleased about, I've got to know so many lovely people, yourself, Priscilla, colleagues in the US, all through LinkedIn. And it's been incredible, the sort of depth and the speed with which those relationships have actually developed. Yeah. And I think one of the things that I've really noticed is that LinkedIn done right helps you build that trust super quickly, because you start sharing about yourself, not oversharing like I've done on this podcast, but it's just because you've got such a friendly face, Eric, but also sharing
a face
enough.
For radio.
Yeah, I've been told the same actually. Yeah. Maybe we could do the face for radio twins. But it does allow you to build that level of trust really, really quickly with people. And I think that's what I'm really excited about now, is saying, coming to the end of this financial year, how am I going to build something that's going to be of a significantly larger scale and impact than what I've done to this point? And that's really very exciting, and been that ability for me to trust other people has really been garnished just by hundreds of small, tiny, positive, sort of repetitive actions on LinkedIn, which is almost in some ways the sort of best desensitization process for a soul that perhaps at times found, like I said to you in the lead up, flirting or dissimulation or, controlled substances, the best way of basically pushing away difficult feelings. You've got to trust people to make good progress,
Yeah, big time. This is a really crappy question to ask anyone, particularly with someone who's got so many thoughts and opinions about what goes on in the world as yourself. But if you could wave a magic wand and sprinkle fairy dust around the world, what's the one thing you'd really like to tackle? The thing that's at your top of the list of priorities? And I know your list is probably pretty wrong about what we do incorrectly as humans. What would you like to be able to fix if you could immediately?
I mean, I realize as I get older, I have more questions than answers. That's the first thing. So it's not easy to say because so many of them are sort of symptoms of a problem rather than the root causes.
Right.
I would actually say that if I could solve one problem, I'd like to support men to be more emotionally available in every relationship that they're in.
Wow.
Whether that's as fathers, whether that's as leaders, whether it's as not being leaders, whether it's saying, you know what, I'm not the person who should be speaking right now. I'm the person who should be shutting the fuck up, standing in the corner, saying nothing, listening and learning and not saying a damn thing. Because we think it's so much about talking and so much of it is actually about listening. And, I said to you before, this is like my first ever podcast where I've actually been the interviewee, and it's been very strange. And I think, that looking, for example, at things like the George Floyd, murder, looking at things like the at the Capitol storming in the States, looking at the continued problems of police brutality, so many of those issues come from a patriarchal, male, violent, male, emotionally unavailable starting position that just says the only way I can relate to the world is through violence. And I think that, I've been there. It's a bad place to be. And actually, if we don't face those own demons about the violence that lack of emotional availability causes, it has seismic impacts on the whole world. So that was kind of 15 things rolled into one. But I think if we could make men more open about talking about their emotions, we'd have happier kids, we'd have happier workplaces, we'd have happier politics, we'd have a happier world,
My goodness, that is a fascinating answer. I thought you were going to go, I can't answer it there, but my God, you pulled that rabbit out of the hat. That's beautiful.
Well,
yeah, beautiful. It really is. No, it is fabulous. Listen, we're probably we could do. I've only ever done 1 2-part Crux Cast, but I think what you and I need to do is make a date to come back, maybe summertime or something, and rerun this if that's okay. But you were talking about some of the. Correct me if I'm wrong. It's either some work you're doing with some of the ladies that you were talking about that have been through violence and all of that, or maybe it was podcasts that you've got coming up.
Yeah.
Just want to walk us through that because that's fabulous.
Absolutely. No, it's been a real sort of honor to be on your show, Eric. So thank you so much. And yeah, so this is basically a 3-part series that's probably going to come out around International Women's Day,
right.
With a fantastic co-host called Kirsten Walkham, who basically is based at a crisis management firm called Smith and Company. And essentially, we have done 3 interviews around tackling violence against women and girls. So first episode is going to be 2 women in conversation about good friends of theirs who were murdered by men. So that's episode 1. So that's an incredible discussion about, violence, around redemption, around, the sort of emotional time bomb that this leaves for family and friends, as well as media portrayals and other things. Second episode is going to be with a Harvard professor who basically uses, or has looked at the impact of traditional tea ceremonies in Ethiopia for tackling and hosting discussions about intimate partner violence, so between men and women, husbands and wives. And then the third is basically with the incredible anti sort of female genital mutilation campaigner Nimco Ali, talking about her life and her sort of genesis doing this sort of really, really difficult work about, some of the, vitriol she faces speaking out in the public domain as a very sort of incredible, female campaigner. So yeah, that's coming probably around March time.
Outstanding. And where can people hear the podcast? Where is your source?
So I'm on all disreputable podcast channels, and the show is called The Outrageous Impact Show. And it's just been so strange and so like empowering and disempowering at the same time to be like the interviewee rather than the interviewer. Like I want to just be like the sort of controlling puppet master. But just sort of having to be here just to be like, just talk about these things has also been such a brilliant experience. And you've been a very sort of able guide and host, Eric.
Oh,
so
thank you so
much.
No, it's been brilliant.
I'll never forget my first.
Never forget your first. So people can get you from a sort of an engagement perspective. So there's the podcast. People can find you on all the disreputable podcast sources. But if people want to talk to you about some of the things that you do, that I guess LinkedIn's the right channel, right?
Please, that'd be wonderful. So it's spelt Olszowski. And you'll also hear me doing a very interesting pronunciation of my surname, inspired by Nigella Lawson and her pronunciation of the word microwave. When you click that little button that basically shows the pronounce your surname feature.
I would ask you to go and click on my little microphone, because I've left a little interesting message there for you. Have you? Well. So
is it an Easter egg?
It's a little Easter egg, yeah.
It's a MacGuffin.
It's a MacGuffin, yeah, absolutely.
Eric's MacGuffin. That's good. There's the title for your podcast.
Listen, you probably won't like this, because you're I've met people like you before, and you're a sort of vanguard. You are charging ahead, this energy and all of that. But I don't know if you've ever looked in the mirror. You probably won't, and said that what you're doing is truly beautiful, and people like me should listen to people like you, because you're not doing this for jollies. You're not doing this for a dopamine hit. You're not doing this for likes and comments, really. I don't think, Patrick. I think you're doing this because it's what you were put on this earth for. So we need more people like you, and we need more people like me who've just clattered through and got to the age of 50 with their head down, listening to music and watching films and going, isn't life great, and skiing down mountains and all of that, to actually, people like my wife who's had a bit of an epiphany, and that she turned 40 a couple of years ago and is becoming a person like you who's more tuned in. So I get it from her, I get it from people like you, and that makes me then become more interested, and it just sort of passes on, and it's like a gift that you give to another person to wake them up and say, look what's happening in the world. So please keep it going. It's been a joy to talk to you.
It's been my real pleasure. And I would just also say that it's strange, because, it's how, you've also impacted me. So, I've been always so taken by everything, you're doing online, and your openness and other things like that. So it's a real honor to be on your show. So thanks so much.
Awesome. We will catch up soon. I will tag in all the appropriate places, tag you in so that people can reach out and get in touch. And I won't say goodbye. I'll say till next time.
Goodbye.
See you, Patrick. Bye-bye.